Hello, welcome to part 6 of toxin sequestration theory. This is my new theory of cancer. I'm very excited about it. Needless to say, it's very different from the mainstream view. The mainstream views cancer as a selfish, uncontrollable, malignant growth that is caused by genetic mutations. Previously, I've talked about how the genetic aspect has been debunked, and my personal theory also goes against the selfish view as well. Building on the research of Stephanie Seneff, who's an MIT professor, I proposed this new theory, which argues that cancer is not a disease, rather it is a symptom of toxic overload, and the true underlying disease is toxic overload. Number two, cancer tumors do not represent selfish malignant growth, rather they represent the body's defense mechanism against toxic overload. They're extra tissue that the body builds on purpose for the reason of trying to store and sequester and process toxins. And specifically, the type of toxins that cancer tumors try to sequester are toxins that create reactive oxygen species, or ROS. And the reason they do that is because ROS are at the center of chronic disease. Every single chronic disease, whether it's diabetes or autoimmune conditions or heart disease, these look like they are all connected to reactive oxygen species. And the body wants to protect itself from these highly damaging chemicals that destroy the body's tissues and organs. And so, and sure enough, every major toxin that you are familiar with, whether it's heavy metals or oxalates or deuterium or glucose and fructose or cigarette smoke or ethanol, they all have the same underlying mechanism. Every single toxin creates reactive oxygen species, ROS. That is how their toxicity is manifested. And, this is supported, for example, by the work of Thomas Levy, where Thomas Levy is a medical doctor, and he says that there is only one cause of chronic disease, and that is oxidative stress. And when you think of oxidative stress, think of ROS. So in this video, I'm going to talk about sort of two late stage symptoms of cancer that otherwise would be viewed as very sad and tragic, but I'm going to try to provide a more hopeful tone when discussing these two things. Namely, I'm going to talk about cachexia, which is muscle wasting, and also metastasis, which is the cancer going to another organ. Now, when people often hear these terms, they think, oh, these are very sad because they are late stage aspects of cancer. But I'm going to reinterpret them as the body working extra hard to try to manage the toxic overload. And hopefully, I will try to provide some hope to say, well, if we view it from this angle, then there is still hope for the patient where they can take actionable actions that they can do to actually change their lifestyle and reduce the toxic load. So let me start first with cachexia. That is muscle wasting. So in sort of late stage cancer, it often happens that people start to lose their muscle mass and they start to become more skinny because their muscle is kind of wasting away. And it's really hard for kind of the mainstream to give a good explanation for what cachexia is. Sometimes they'll say things like, well, it's the cancer, being extra hungry, and it's like pulling fuel out of the muscle to try to feed itself. Once again, thinking of cancer as being selfish. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. We can flip it around and say, well, maybe it's cancer trying to detoxify the body. And it turns out that muscle tissue is the body's primary storage for the ammonia toxin. Ammonia is a highly toxic chemical, creates massive amounts of ROS. It causes damage to the body's organs, like brain damage to the arteries, etc. And it's a toxin that normally our livers can handle because our liver's job is to detoxify ammonia and convert it to urea so that we can excrete it in the urine. But in late stage cancers, many people's livers are not functioning very well. And so I believe the number one cause of ammonia toxicity is actually a damaged liver or a dysfunctional liver. And of course, there's other sources of ammonia toxicity. Ammonia is found in cleaning products. So please beware, check your cleaning products and make sure that it does not have ammonia in it, because many cleaning products do. And if it does, throw it out. There's also ammonia I've heard recently, someone told me that there's ammonia in hair dyes, which is very interesting, that some people, when they dye their hair, they get ammonia in that. Other people have talked about ammonia toxicity from gut dysbiosis due to having the wrong gut bacteria. But also you can get ammonia toxicity from very long, prolonged exercise. If you just exercise way too much, if you're always running marathons, for example, then the ammonia will produce in your muscle cells. So those are some of the sources of ammonia toxicity. And I've already talked previously about how glutamine is the body's safe carrier for ammonia in the blood. And that's why cancer loves to import glutamine so much. So what happens is that in the muscle tissue, the body attaches ammonia to a glutamate, which is an amino acid molecule, and then that becomes glutamine. And then it sends off the glutamine into the blood, and the cancer cell imports the glutamine. And then once inside the cancer cell, it rips the ammonia off the glutamine, and then it detoxifies the ammonia, just like the liver would. That's the exact same process that happens in the liver. So once again, the cancer tumor is acting like the body's second liver. Now, in the case of cachexia, it's a situation of ammonia overload. So the body is really, chances are you might have some liver damage in this case. The body's really struggling to manage the amount of ammonia in the blood. And if the ammonia in the blood goes above a certain threshold, then the body can die. It can literally destroy the brain, destroy the vital organs. So the body appears to have basically a threshold for how much ammonia it can tolerate in the blood. And all the detox organs, the liver and the cancer tumors, are working overtime to pull in the glutamine so that they can detoxify the ammonia quickly. But there reaches a point where when the ammonia overload is too severe, if you have too much liver damage, then the body says, well, having just a cancer tumor is not enough. I have to do more. And the body decides to initiate cachexia, which is a muscle wasting where it starts to churn into the muscle and metabolize the muscle so that it can free up more glutamine to send to the cancer tumor in order to basically detoxify ammonia faster. That's the point. It's literally because the tissues are becoming toxic and you have to detoxify ammonia at an even faster rate. And so the entire point of cachexia appears to be to reduce the amount of ammonia in the body. And I did numerical simulations just to double check this. I simulated the amount of ammonia in the blood over time, and I showed that in these simulations that once once you have liver damage, then the cancer tumor can start to bring the amount of ammonia down, but then nevertheless more liver damage can cause it to rise, and then eventually when you cross at that threshold, the body initiates cachexia, and cachexia serves to stabilize the amount of ammonia in the blood. And I showed in my simulations that the concentration of ammonia in the blood managed to stabilize after cachexia was initiated. In other words, the numerical simulations confirm the intuition that cachexia was a protective mechanism. It was not a disease. And this is important because these are two conditions that in mainstream medicine that they consider a disease. They consider cancer a disease and they consider cachexia a disease. And I'm saying both of them are protective mechanisms. They are not actually diseases. And you might say, well, why would the body waste its muscle? Because that could be life-threatening. Well, it's about slow death versus fast death. If you allow the ammonia to continue to rise in the blood, you would die immediately. That would be a very fast death. And the body does not want a fast death because it would cause brain damage, cause damage to your heart and arteries. So ammonia toxicity is deadly. So it chooses a slow death, which is muscle wasting, because it holds out hope that maybe eventually you might reduce the ammonia burden that you're intaking or whatever, or maybe the liver might heal over time. So the body still holds out hope that you may reduce the toxic load in the future, and that's why it initiates cachexia. Yet, yes, it's true that cachexia can cause death eventually, but it is a slow death, and it is a slower death than if you allowed ammonia levels to continue to rise in the bloodstream. Okay, so that explains cachexia. Like I said, the overall interpretation is that it's the body's defense against ammonia overload. Now I'm going to talk about metastasis. And metastasis is arguably the most feared word in all of cancer, right? When a cancer patient hears the word metastasis, it strikes fear into the patient. I'm going to try to provide a more hopeful perspective on things. Now, I've already talked about how cancer itself is not a disease, and I'm going to argue once again that metastasis also is not a disease, and it actually does not even represent spread of the cancer. Rather, it's just the body building more storage vaults, more vaults to store toxins. And once we take this view that basically the body is constructing storage vaults and it decides that it needs an extra storage vault, then it removes some of the fear around metastasis. Then you say, okay, well, maybe I can help my body out by reducing the toxic load, and I have agency. But if someone tells you like, oh, you have metastasis, then unfortunately you're probably going to think you're going to die very soon. You're going to wonder, how many days do I have left on Earth? And but if we say, well, it's just your body's defense against toxic overload, then that gives you the opportunity to change your lifestyle and reduce the intake of toxins. Now, what's the mainstream view on metastasis? Well, they basically, of course, argue that it's a hallmark of cancer's aggressiveness. They say, cancer cells acquire new mutations that allow them to detach from the primary tumor and then conquer the rest of the body. So in other words, the cancer tumor has kind of like evolved to become more aggressive. That's the way that they interpret metastasis. And, I think the problem is that view leaves a bunch of questions unanswered. Namely, why is it that metastases always seem to form in a small subset of organs? Namely, they particularly go to the bone, the liver, and the lungs. Maybe a couple organs as well, but those are the three common ones: bone, liver, and lungs. The mainstream view can't really explain why those three organs are always chosen. And it also doesn't explain why do these metastatic sites, however you say it, why do they have lots of detox machinery? Why are they really good at sequestering toxins? And why is it that the body seems really willing to support them with infrastructure? So the body devotes massive amounts of infrastructure to supporting metastatic tumors. Angiogenesis, which is the building of new blood vessels to supply the blood to the metastatic tumors. Why does the body want to do that? It doesn't make sense from the mainstream view why the body would be just supporting this aggressive tumor that wants to kill the body. And you would think the body would want to protect itself. But everything sort of makes sense when you just view it from a different angle. When you view it from the angle of toxin sequestration theory, then we're just viewing this metastasis as the body building secondary sites for sequestering toxins. And it just so happens that the bone, the liver, and the lungs are really good sites for secondary, detox organs. And, and we can get into that, why that is. But basically, in the case of, for example, the bone is really good at handling like mineral-based toxins. So things like heavy metals, those kind of mineral-based toxins or metal-based toxins, those are really good at being sequestered in the bone. And naturally, the liver itself is already very highly, designed to be a detox organ. So you would imagine that the liver would be good at sequestering and detoxifying toxins. So that would be a good metastatic site. Similarly, the lungs, those also can be viewed as kind of like a detox organ because the lungs have capabilities of walling off toxins and sequestering them. So there are reasons why the body chooses the bone, the liver, and the lungs, and it's not choosing, once again, the heart. It's not choosing the heart for metastasis. So you have to think about the asymmetry there. Why is it that it chooses one organ over another? It doesn't really make sense if cancer is random and it just wants to conquer the body. If it wanted to conquer the body, why is it that you never see a heart metastasis? So, okay, then there is the question of why do cancer cells migrate? Now, that is a observed phenomenon. I'm not denying the existence of that phenomenon. It's documented in the literature that cancer cells do actually move from the primary tumor to a new site in order to make a new tumor. And from the, like I said, from the mainstream view, they're viewing it as like, well, the cancer tumor is becoming more aggressive. From my view, it's that, well, the body has these pre-adapted construction crews. The body wants to build a new tumor in a new location because the toxic load is too much, and it needs help. The body needs help in a different location. And so it basically is recruiting help from the original tumor. The original tumor is already well adapted to handle toxins. They typically have upregulated transporters, like things like glucose transporters, fatty acid transporters to transport seed oils, iron transporters to transport excess iron. And they have all these upregulated transporters and all these upregulated detox enzymes, to detoxify ethanol and detoxify fructose. So these cancer cells that are in the primary tumor are perfectly adapted to handle toxic loads. So the body's like, well, let me send off some of those pre-adapted cells to start building the new tumor. So I consider these as a pre-adapted construction crew. These are pre-adapted cells that are already built to handle toxins, and that is why the body sends these cancer cells off to migrate to the new site in order to build the next tumor. And and there is evidence to basically support this pre-adapted pre-adapted construction crew idea. And that's because that evidence basically is that the body doesn't even select random cancer cells. There's, when you look at the cancer cells that are selected for migration, it selects the most capable team for the job. It basically picks the best cancer cells out of all the different cells in the tumor, and picks the ones that have like the most transporters, the most detox enzymes, the ones that are the most capable at sequestering toxins in order to start the new tumor in the new location. Okay, so that's the basic idea of metastasis in my theory. We can also think about a mapping between primary cancers and metastatic sites. If you have a primary cancer that's prostate, the most likely secondary site for metastasis would be the bone. Another common one would be the lymph nodes. And in the case of the bone, it would be things like the spine, the pelvis, or the ribs. And the interpretation for that is that the bone provides massive iron and mineral storage capacities. And so the bone is really good at storing these excess minerals. That's why the secondary site is chosen to be bone. Okay, now if your primary cancer is a breast cancer, then the most common metastatic sites are things like the bone, the liver, and the lymph nodes there. And then for when your primary cancer is colon cancer, the liver is very common as the primary metastatic sites. And for the pancreas, it's the liver and the peritoneum. Okay, so why would the body pick the liver? Well, the liver is the master detox organ, and it's the natural overflow site for dietary toxins. Okay, so that allows us to basically connect primary tumors to specific secondary tumors. Now, we shouldn't really view primary tumors and secondary tumors as much different. Honestly, they're really just the same machinery, just at a different scale. It's just basically building a bigger version, of, say, the primary tumor. And so, you don't have to really change your mindset on what a secondary tumor is. Um, Finally, just want to re-emphasize that this view from my theory, I believe, explains things a little bit better than the mainstream view, because the mainstream view struggles to explain why it's always the bone, the liver, and the lungs as the metastatic sites. And why is it that the body is supporting these things? Why is it that the body is providing all the infrastructure for the metastasis to happen? And then, of course, I believe this does provide hope for healing. If someone does have metastasis, you shouldn't immediately be thinking like, oh, I'm going to be dying soon. Rather, you should be thinking, well, I can fix this if I just reduce my toxic load. And, yes, my body may be building more storage sites for toxins, but I'm going to help my body out by reducing my intake of toxins. So you have agency. It's not a death sentence. That's the key point. It's not a death sentence. And so that's why I believe, this viewpoint gives people potential hope that in the face of otherwise despair. All right, thanks very much for listening. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.